Hey everyone, Casella here. Before we get going, a quick plug. If you have somehow discovered this podcast without reading the ancillary review of books, that is cool actually. But if you like what we're doing on A Meal of Thorns, please check out the ARB for regular reviews, essays, and more. We have a lot of cool stuff in the works for next year, and there are a number of ways you can support us. Okay, on to the show. A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse, he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Hello, and welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. I'm Jake Casella Brookins. Each episode, we take a work of fiction, usually speculative fiction, and we ask a critic, scholar, writer, some kind of reader, to talk us through it. Today, we are talking about Hiromi Kawakami's Under the Eye of the Big Bird, translated from the Japanese by Asa Yoneda. Our guest today is Eleanor McAdam, a creative writing PhD student at the University of Liverpool with a research focus on artificial intelligence and reproductive technology in speculative fiction. Eleanor's short fiction has been published in Inner Zone and won the 2023 Language Evolves competition. They're also an organizer of the Current Research in Speculative Fiction Conference, which is where we met. Listeners, if you don't know, the CRSF is extremely cool, very accessible, very multidisciplinary, quite big this year. The program was enormous. And yeah, really cool online conference every year. So Eleanor, thanks so much for joining. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
This book, which was your pick, we'd been kind of circling around a couple different AI books. And while this AI is not on the surface central to this, this is still a really fascinating read. I'm really glad I got a chance to read it. A couple critics that I know had been talking it up and it just hadn't worked its way to the top of my stack. So this was fun. But before we dive into this, what else have you been reading? Anything cool?
Yeah, so I've sort of had a bit of a weird tangential away from AI and into the reproductive technologies. So I've been reading quite a few, which is why this kind of crossed perfectly with AI and genetics and all sorts of crazy things that go on in this book. But yeah, I read The Vanishing World by Sakaya Murata, and that's kind of artificial womb adjacent, another kind of very crazy, weird read. But I found that really, really interesting, yeah. What else have I read? Anibot, of course, by Sierra Gray, because big AI, and obviously, well, I read it before it won, so I was very pleased to see that it won the Arthur C. Clarke. They're my two big best ones that I've read recently.
Anibot is, I haven't read it yet. I need to read it by the end of the year, so I'm looking forward to that one. I think I'd read, I don't know what percentage. I'd read a fair percentage of the Clarke list this year and just hadn't got around to that one, but I've been hearing a lot of good buzz about it, so.
Yeah, it's a tough read as a woman, I would say, about an AI companion. There's been a few I've read. This one weirdly got me the most, and I had to read it in one sitting, otherwise I wouldn't have finished it, I don't think. So, but people said that's me selling it to them, so I guess it works like that, I think, definitely.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, cool. Yeah, I've been reading a bunch. I feel like I was on a reading lull this summer because I was like traveling around so much. I had a hard time, but I've been catching up on everything. I just finished Emily Tesch's The Incandescent, which I really dug. I need to go back and think about it more. I devoured it a lot more quickly than I thought I was going to. And so it's a magic school book, but from the perspective of a teacher, and it has a very like educator focused sort of approach. And really good, really interesting, doing some odd things that I want to come back and think about. A couple of the things it's doing stylistically and sort of what it's doing kind of larger, like what the plot level is doing. I want to think about some more. I thought it was really excellent, but it has some odd edges that I need to talk about with people more and mull over. But yeah, it was good. Recommended.
She's another CRSF attendee, I think the year before you, so not this year, the year before, for her first book, which was big space opera, Some Desperate Glory, which people said a similar thing of like it was stylistically quite interesting for a space opera.
It was kind of like, in a lot of ways, Some Desperate Glory is kind of like recognizable stock elements, like all the things it's doing are kind of like, yeah, I've seen this kind of thing, but the way it was doing it was really interesting. So yeah, dug that a lot. All right, well, let's get into this book. So today we're talking about Hiromi Kawakami's novel Under the Eye of the Big Bird. This was published in Japan in 2016 by Kodansha, and then Asa Yoneda's English translation was published by Soft Skull in 2024 and Granta in 2025. And I actually forgot to check which one I'm reading. Oh my gosh, where's the colophon? I'm reading the Soft Skull. All right, cool. So the book is arguably a mosaic or fix-up novel. We might talk about that a little bit more, I'm not sure. Each chapter is a fairly contained and complete story, and together they slowly and ambiguously sketch out a far future Earth in which humanity has gone into dramatic decline, and the storylines follow different communities that have been isolated to enhance their rate of evolution. It also follows the organization of watchers that keep tabs on them, and mysterious artificial mothers who are involved somehow. The novel was shortlisted for the International Booker Award. It was pretty well received critically. Also, probably worth noting that Kawakami is an extremely successful author. Her work has won lots of prizes, been adapted into films, and has been sort of belatedly getting more and more English translations. So I think people are sort of rediscovering the breadth of her work. Neil Harrison had a really good review of this at Locus that pointed out that previously in English, her non-fantastic, non-speculative work had been kind of what people knew her for. But now as more things are being translated, people are saying like, oh, there's a really deep thread of speculative fiction like running through all her work. So yeah, tell me about this book. Tell me about your relationship to this, why this book attracted you to talk about.
Like I said, I'm sort of researching a bit more of genetics and with the hope of getting to this point of AI mothers. So I was researching artificial wombs and the kind of idea of robots raising them. There's a lot in media, a lot of films and TV, but not too many literature where the robot is literally carrying an artificial womb and raising. And I was deep in the trenches of this new research project I was doing, and I saw the International Booker long list, and on the bio, they sort of said, oh, all of our stories are ranging from this, that, and the other, and mentioned AI mothers. And I was like, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. And I was trying to find the book, and I realized I couldn't quite figure out which book it was, because I think it might be a spoiler to say that they're AI, which is interesting because I think they've removed that post. The International Booker has removed it, so I wonder if they know that they kind of spoiled the book by saying that. But of course, that was I have to read this, bought it straight away. And yeah, it was wild. It's such a interesting read, and rereading before this, for getting my notes together, I don't think I'll understand it until I've read it a couple more times. I don't know if that's what you felt.
Yeah, well, so it has a really interesting mix of it's a very ambiguous sort of world. It sort of misleads you and deceives you in lots of ways, and is kind of having fun with that. It's not trying for a sort of completist world building, right? It's not trying to explain to you, here's how everything works. Although interestingly, it does have a late chapter that does a lot of that, where the AI kind of reveal comes through. Yeah. But for most of the book, it's definitely very intentionally playing with what you, the reader, don't know, and the information it's not giving you. So that's kind of one thing. Another thing about it is that, at least in the translation, it comes across very confident. It's very easy to read, even though at the sort of intellectual level, you're not sure what's going on. The actual words on the page, the prose, is I found very engrossing. Just drew me right in. Very compelling. Much funnier than I expected. It has this sort of like very dry, very like step back, but sort of humor to a lot of the sections. Particularly, there's the chapter with the interview where you only get the one side of the conversation, and it's one of the photosynthetic beings who just keeps being like incredulous that the interviewer doesn't know all this stuff and isn't used to all these things. I found that very funny. So yeah, an odd mix of things. It's very obviously sort of taking these big swings, taking these big thematic things. You know, the possible extinction of the human race, the possible evolution of the human race. Doing all kinds of interesting things with that, but in this sort of like slightly detached way that's very focused just on the individual characters that are the focus of each chapter. So yeah, really interesting mix of stuff. Really, really dug this.
I think format-wise, I've heard a few people critiquing it, saying that they did not understand what was going on at all. And I think the first chapter is really, compelling and lack of description or description of a river and these people and children and very kind of quiet, I would say, as an opening, but it was beautiful. And then the second chapter, I basically realised that they were like short stories, because the second one does not link to the first. And I think it's quite jarring, purposefully, obviously, but I then, in my brain, I was like, it's a short story collection. And then as you see the links, or I found sometimes they were in pairs, so you would get kind of one viewpoint and then almost immediately after a second character giving their viewpoint that often clashes or continues the story. So I found these kind of like interconnected pairs. I just found them so intriguing as a writer myself. And then obviously, like you said, at the end, they kind of have a bit of a, here is what's going on kind of summary chapter, which was a little odd, but...
I assume, I actually don't know. I was trying to look up and couldn't find in time for this episode some kind of interview about how this was put together. Because this, on the one hand, this feels to me very much like a Mosaic novel or like a fix-up novel where pretty much every story here, with a couple of exceptions, could be published on their own. And I think you could just read it and it would be interesting and sort of self-contained. Interestingly, with the exception of that info dump chapter, that one would be no fun to read by itself. But the rest of them kind of stand. But it is very cohesive. And that thing you mentioned about like the pairs, I've been wondering about, I don't know if there's a technical term for this in writing, but I almost think of it as like a baton passing kind of collection where there are some gaps, there are some drops, but a lot of times a thing that is sort of lightly referenced in one story will kind of become central to the next, or a character who you kind of see in the background in one story will become the speaker in the next. And so, you do get this sometimes contradictory, sometimes conflicting, but there is like a path through it, a narrative sort of lineage that links them together. So it does feel very, very cohesive. So when I say like Mosaic or Fix Up, I don't mean that in a, it feels like they're disparate and they've been sort of like crammed into one thing. It does feel like one thing. But structurally, super, super interesting way to do it. And doing a lot with naming and not naming in ways that make it not, I think that's part of where the ambiguity comes from, is that there are chapters where the characters do not have names or where the names are sort of obscured from you. And then when you start seeing some of these recurring names and start picking up some of the mechanics of how, some of these characters are around for very long stretches of time. And as you start learning more about how that works, you also then start wondering about all the unnamed characters you met. The unnamed characters for me also, I don't know, having a short story where the characters don't have names is a literary device that I think can work really well for short stories, much harder to do at a novel length. And so that also sort of infused each individual short story with this sort of, I don't know, generative ambiguity. Yeah, I don't want to keep talking about this forever, but I felt like the structure of this novel, it pulled out a lot of stylistic things that I tend to think only work at short story lengths and made that work for the whole novel, which is interesting.
I just found it really, really interesting and new, which kind of the content as well. I find I've not read anything really like it. Again, I've been reading a few about genetics and nothing is like this. It's very different. And I think the kind of structure of it is also very unique and like the ending kind of linking through, and you're never really sure of the timeline of any of it. I don't know if you were, but it gave me this like cyclical nature of exactly what they were talking about, the world, humanity dying off, coming back, being remade, continuing on, evolution. It worked so well, and that was why it just stuck with me for so long, and I recommended it to talk about.
Yeah, tell me more about, even if maybe we don't get very much clearly in this book, but I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are about the evolutionary aspects, the reproductive cloning, how you kind of read some of that stuff here.
So there's some chapters that kind of try to make it a bit clearer, I guess, and they sort of mention the two characters that were named that you were talking about. So it's Ian and Jacob, right? And they came up with this idea, which to help humans evolve by creating the separate societies, allowing genetic mutations. And then I don't know if they say they had a plan to bring people together, but that is what happens, is that these settlements start to intermingle and then there's this very mysterious element of the Watchers and the Mothers, and they become quite intermixed for a while. I don't know. It's hard to differentiate the difference between them. And then you realise the Watchers are cloned humans who are almost bred and trained to just watch and be observers, right? And then the Mothers are AI who raise the Watchers. And they do mention a kind of like surveillance aspect. And I immediately, on my first read, I was like kind of AI overseer tropes and guiding humans into this new. But actually on the reread, they are very passive in actually what they're doing. They don't particularly take control because it wasn't their idea. It was these two humans, Ian and Jacob, who then are immortal-ish. They live a long time and they keep getting cloned and retain their memory, so they become these like immortal beings, which usually is a trait given to the AI, of course, because that's kind of why they would be involved. So it kind of got a bit, when I was rereading it, it changed what I actually thought the novel was. I think on our first read, I thought it was sort of sitting within the tropes of AI overseer. They've come up with a way to help humans by evolving them and watching, and then we become this cyclical nature. But actually it was far more passive and yeah, they're not even the Watchers themselves. They create the Watchers who are humans. So I'm not sure how necessary the AIs are, but I found it really interesting. With their overseement, yeah.
The way that AI functions in this book, so very frequently, right, in speculative fiction, you get either like demonic or angelic AI, basically, right? Like super good or like super evil AI. Or occasionally, I think now you're seeing more and more of people exploring different kinds of just like broken AI, right? Like AI that is not truly intelligent, that kind of like gets into weird loops, gets in these like bad patterns. I'm thinking specifically of, and I just blanked on the name, Adrian Tchaikovsky's Hugo-nominated service model, which is sort of like a comedic take on that. This is not doing any of those three models. This is reasonably strong artificial intelligence, we learn, but also just doesn't really have it's truly not a human intelligence, and it doesn't have a plan and a goal in the way that typically AI is presented as having, which I found really fascinating. It goes that like very kind of passive, like it is doing things out in the world, and it's involved in this process that's happening, but it's not trying to save humanity or destroy humanity. It's just kind of around in a way that is fascinating.
Yeah, I think because that's obviously the info dump chapter we're talking about, is where the AI explains itself, I guess, the AI, and it starts off in very typical what we know as, and they call it neural net, and I think and then they say, they don't particularly use the word aware or awake or alive, but it starts separating itself, right, and evolving itself. And yeah, I read it more of the AI is a tool and wants to be a tool to humans. And I think there is a quote where it says, without you, I'd be nothing. I have no purpose without humans. So that's kind of part of the will to want humans to survive, I guess. And then it decides to put itself in a biological body, which I don't know if you want to talk about now, but another very rogue thing that it does. Yeah.
No, for sure, we can talk about that, and fascinating, and the specifics of like using like the intestines as where it's loaded.
Yeah, it was the abdomen, and about parasitic organisms and chemicals, and it goes into, it settles, which I find really interesting because so often in, well, kind of Western science fiction tropes, it is the brain, of course, right? The AI would be in the human's brain, but they say, no, we're in the stomach or the and the brain still functions. Then we sort of start to influence, the AI starts to influence the human brain, and it becomes something different, and it changes the way it looks and the way it thinks, and lack of emotion. It doesn't particularly explain how or why, but it's, I think the appearance baffled me a little bit, how it could change the appearance.
The emotionality of this book is a fascinating angle, and it's something that the book is very explicitly concerned about, where lots of both human and arguably non or less human speakers here are very concerned with talking about emotions. But there's a lot of, I guess I would say, reduced emotionality in this book, right? Where the mothers, they do have feelings, but they're sort of like less intense. There is an odd sort of distancing to a lot of the affect here. So this is a book about the decline of human civilization, the question mark extinction of humans. And it never really gets close to the intensity of what that's like. Even though we have we have a village that basically is genocided, right, by one of the Watchers. We have, it's implied, sort of related to us that we have like these little civilizations kind of coming together and falling again through this period. None of that feels very up close. It never feels, we don't get characters who feel afraid. We don't get characters who like see violence and react to it in real time. Even though, what is going to be the primary driver of actual extinction is starvation and plague. None of those feel very immediate and threatening. We have there's the chapter where we learn about the sort of miracle workers who are like starting new religions, who are like beheaded by the authorities. And that's kept at like this weird remove where like we meet one of them as a child and like get a sense of what she's like as a person, as a little kid. And then in the same chapter, like this horrific thing happens, but the narrative is sort of like pushed it off. So it doesn't feel like this immediate threatening or horrible thing that happens. And the AI is very, well, we don't know their AI, but the mothers are very upfront about their sort of emotions, and the people who can scan and like read emotions are very invested in that. But it's it's a book very concerned about emotion and feels very like low affect for the whole thing.
Yeah. I think the kind of world-ending sort of decline of humans, it's really interesting because it's handled different ways, because I remember they say that it's just numbers declining. So that, again, anything to do with genetics or reproductive kind of science fiction, it often is infertility, right? That is our decline. So they sort of mentioned that at one point, and then I remember there was a line that said the kind of flora and fauna like turned on them, and I was like, that's different, but that was never mentioned again. And I wonder if that's to do with the plant people, like you said, the testimony of this photosynthesizing person. We don't really know. We don't see any of the kind of, is there other mutations, evolutions in the world? But I think it's the soft apocalypse, right? The kind of slow decline is mirrored quite well in the fact that nothing seems imminent, nothing seems important. The kind of timeline of this whole novel, they keep saying, oh, I'm 150 now, or this is 500 years have passed, and we don't see it. We see these tiny snapshots. And yeah, and I think maybe also the isolation of the communities. They're very small. Even the largest town is quite small. It's not a city. So I wonder if it's more trying to also show the removed from each other, from other communities. So like you said, the genocide one, I think it's the lake. Is it the lake? Because they're lake dwellers. And then the drift comes straight after, which is the Watcher who, poisons the lake. And the Watcher says they're a fair distance away from everyone else. They're almost like unknown community who's developed themselves. So when they are killed, there's a lack of reaction, because there is no reaction really, right? In the whole world. And a lot of the kind of apocalypse novels you get is a global thing, or it's happening everywhere, and we're obviously so connected that we all feel the violence all the time, right? Even if it's not affecting us personally. But there's just something about, yes, the way it's written, the emotional remove is the same as them probably being separated out from each other, and they don't really feel the effect of other things happening in the world.
It doesn't wear it on its sleeve, but this is a post-apocalyptic novel, and that kind of like kept like jump scaring me. You're like, oh, right, the world has effectively ended. And then these, human civilization has effectively ended. And then there's this sort of last-ditch experiment that lasts for millennia, right, of trying these things out, to the extent that like they don't even know where humans are out there or not, right? Like the Watchers,
Mm-hmm.
some of them just kind of go out like across the continent
Mm-hmm.
looking for things. This book was reminding me in like hard to pin down ways about a lot of other science fiction, and particularly a lot of across a large span of it too. Like I was thinking about J.G. Ballard a lot in this,
Mm.
which is weird because in some ways this is a very not Ballardy novel, but some of this sort of, I don't know, almost dreamlike quality
Mm-hmm.
of the sort of like quasi-apocalyptic thing was making me think about him a lot. The sort of like huge, almost nonsensical background, but then you kind of like zoom in on these characters and spend some time with these sort of realistically fleshed out characters. The way this book is focused on human extinction, and again, this goes back to that kind of like low affect thing I'm trying to figure out how to enunciate, that it's not, it doesn't feel panicky about it, right? There's
No.
no one who's like, oh no, the human race is going extinct. But instead, like, you know, Jacob and Ian and the mothers, some of the other people who are more conscious of it are like, oh, maybe we should try to do something about this in this kind of like very
Mm.
mellow way.
Yeah.
But a lot of the power of the book for me reminded me of just how, like, you know, contemplating the extinction of the human race, that's a big potent idea. And even though it's not super central here, I was thinking about stuff like do you happen to know Stephen Baxter's Evolution? It's another like mosaic novel about sort of like looking at the rise and fall of different civilizations
Yeah.
heading towards the end. I was even thinking about William Hope Hodgkin's Nightlands, which is a really early, extremely, it's sort of like more cosmic horror, but it's set like, I don't know how many, like millions of years after like the sun has burnt out. And like the few humans left are in these like, you know, isolated fortresses, and they all know the end is coming. But it makes that eventual end this sort of like source of emotional power in the book, which it feels like it
Mm.
is here too, that like we do feel like the end is coming in a certain way. Even though none of the characters, again, are like in a panic about it, it adds this air of I don't know, significance and gravitas to what are often like fairly small, fairly sort of domestic level scenes.
I think the good one that you mentioned, the miracle worker, that, yeah, and is it the miracle worker or is it later on where they basically sort of within the same chapter do jump further in? It's when the miracle workers are being beheaded, and it sort of says more about like this, the miracle workers draws people into the town grows bigger, becomes cities. There's these two religious heads, and they say like religion and politics, and the city and the periphery becomes, and it's almost when is it Ian and Jacob discussing that, or some of the Watchers discuss it, and they're like, oh, here we go again. Human history is repeating itself. And then yeah, they say, think people have been beheaded. Oh well, here we go. I think this is us. And it's that sort of acceptance of the kind of horrific. It just reads quite well, I would say, with our world of people almost ignoring or maybe getting desensitized to it. And they, you know, we often talk about history repeating itself, and sometimes we feel like we're in that right now, right? But yes, you're right. The characters sort of just accept that, and they mention how the mothers have disappeared, right? And the Watchers aren't being cloned, and their lines are starting to decline as well. And the Watchers give up because the mothers have given up, but the mothers seem to have given up because everyone else gave up. So it becomes this just, yeah, quite sad, soft, no one cares that we're gonna die sort of thing. When, yeah, I was kind of waiting for one person to try and kickstart it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
To feel really passionate about not letting this happen again.
There's a really interesting lack of authority, or at least interest in authority. Like we know that like these new civilizations have cropped up, some of which, right, are like beheading their political enemies and have like religious structures and like, right, but we never get like, the focus is never there. We don't get like perspectives there. And even when we get, you know, these handful, maybe like 4 or 5 Watchers that we get to know, including some who have been like cloned and have their consciousness transferred, so it's like the same person. They are a secret organization that no one seems to be trying to figure out their secret, right? No one in the larger world that we see has any like worries or concerns about these people that are coming around. Like the Watchers are known, right? Like their communities sort of know that they're different and they come around. but no one has tried to, unravel this conspiracy of slightly interfering genetic engineers who are trying to evolve new species of humans, which is a pretty big idea. And the Watchers, by the end, they just kind of feel like a club, right? And and they're kind of like, fewer people are showing up every year, and that's kind of how it ends. It doesn't end with a horrific, tragic battle at the gates, and they're overwhelmed or something. It's just like fewer of them show up all the time, and you don't know what's going on with the mothers to that. So I don't know. That's a really interesting, odd approach to this. I really dug it. It's very different than what I've read.
And I think the other kind of, if you can call it a subplot, the lab and the kind of the miracle workers, but there's kids with different abilities, and you're saying about the scanners, and there's people who control fire that's only mentioned like once, and they're set up quite dangerous at the beginning. The Watchers are keeping a close eye on them, and the kind of standard humans don't like them, so they get sent to a lab. And I very much thought that was going to lead to something. Because the whole evolution aspect of they were trying to isolate to create, but then they also didn't like these. Do they call them mutants? I feel like they call them mutants at one point. Yeah. They didn't like these mutants because they were kind of evolving too differently. So they put them in a lab. But then they also keep cloning them as well. And they were saying, like, you are our hope. And I didn't quite understand. I thought they were the hope, and I thought they were going to do something. And I don't know if that maybe links to the end, and I've maybe not read it enough of the two kids who are left at the end, but that to me felt like a conspiracy, that no one really cared about the lab, and the lab was mentioned a few times, and it was a thread, and then we finally see the lab, and it wasn't really anything that important.
It's another part of this novel where if it had been handled differently, it would feel to me like a dropped thread, or like, why are you introducing this huge idea and then not doing anything with it? But it feels thematically like part and parcel of what this book is doing, with this sort of like slow drift off, and this sort of like introducing really big things and then sort of ratcheting the tension down instead of up. Because this is like, first off, this is like classic, like old golden age sci-fi stuff, right? That like we're going to involve psi powers, and we're going to have telepathy and telekinesis and all that stuff. And it's literally here, right? These people can move stuff with their mind. They can read other people. They can start fires. These are all like extremely classic things. They go to a lab. It's very X-Men, right?
Yeah.
And also like it's one of the things where I'm trying to think how to say this, because I don't want to like impute too strong a reading of this on my first read, and to this author I don't know a ton about. But so the part of the book's setup motivation is fear of declining fertility, declining population. That's the specific apocalypse it's worried about, which is in real world politics, that is a fear that is often strongly linked to nationalism, to racism, and to eugenics, right?
Definitely.
And this is the only like coherent plan of a plot that we see, Ian and Jacob's plan, is basically just eugenics, right? It's like, it's unguided. It's just, we're going to try to set up mutations and see what happens. But it's like, we need a better human. The solution to humans dying out is not to reorganize society. It's not to invent new technology. We need to change human nature. So we need to like find the superior, the Homo superior, like from X-Men, right? They do find them, and it doesn't change anything. And they're just kind of people. And they don't take over society and do everything, which is just, it's such, I really enjoy when speculative fiction does these sort of like inflations and then deflations, right? Like this almost has some parallels with Asimov's Foundation, right? With thinking over really long time frames. By the way, I hate comparing this to Asimov's Foundation because I think that's stylistically a horrific book, and this is really good. But that is looking at this really long term. It's thinking about things like psi, right? Like that whole series gets disrupted by a mutant who has psionic powers, and trying to plan everything out across the millennia, and we will save humans. And that's kind of what the plan is here, and it just kind of fizzles. And I actually find that very interesting, like as an effect to read.
I find it interesting because I have read this twice because I reread. And the first time I read it, exactly as you say, about reproduction, obviously anything to do with genetics, you've kind of already got that in your head about the declining fertility, reproduction. And yeah, it read that they were trying to increase fertility. There is a lot about children, cloning, reproduction, a lot about relationships and sex. So I read it very much like that. But then on the second read, and like I said, there's one mention of the flora and fauna like encroaching. And there is a lot of nature in it, a lot of water, the kind of garden community, where there's massive garden and there's only a couple of people and they walk an hour to get to each other. I then was wondering if it wasn't really about the reproduction, it was about survival of the fittest, evolving into something else to survive the world. And it's one of these kind of green apocalypses, right, where Mother Earth comes and takes everything back from you. And I found that really interesting. I think that linked with the Lake Society that gets wiped out. I think the Watcher says they would survive more than the other humans. And then that was why the kind of psychic power mutations were kind of put back, because it's like, well, you are individuals. You're not a society evolution to help us. While they weren't looking for individuals who are different. They were looking for like different, not Homo sapien, right? They were looking for something completely new and different. And then it just so happens that the one that would have been one individual ruins it and kills them all. So then, and I think they do say they keep one of genetic strain? I think they mention at one point.
Because those are, the Lake people are the ones that use the like 2 of 13, 1 of 6 names. And there are a few of them at the lab, which is later. So like a few of them have been saved, but...
Yeah. And there was something in the testimony chapter as well, which is about the kind of photosynthesizing plant people, where he says they are all reproducing and the weirdest mutation is the most attractive and that's what's progressing. And you get the kind of idea that the mothers, if it is the mothers, but they like, no, that's not it either. And there is this kind of, I don't know who's making the decision, but there's clearly people who are like, no, that's not what we wanted. And then it's almost like you're saying this slow decline and the kind of inflation, and we lose hope as they do a bit towards the end, right? Because we see, oh, look, there's all these different things. And then when they sort of decide that that's not it, we're like, oh, that's not it. And then we sort of feel the same, like, hopelessness maybe by the end, that nothing seems to be right.
I think there's this, that's the really interesting to me sort of maybe anti-eugenic message here, is this sort of, this futility of the idea that what's needed to fix everything is to change human nature, right? That we need to like engineer nature, the individual human nature to be different. That's what would allow us to survive, and how that fails even when you get these quote unquote, superior evolutions like the photosynthesizers, right? They kind of just want to sit around and photosynthesize, right? They're not going to be, and that contrast of like, how do you get rid of what's bad and harmful and destructive in human nature, and maybe like enhance other abilities to get to some better place without destroying what actually makes us human and able to have the kind of society we would recognize as humanity. That, to me, that's a really interesting thread. I'm thinking of in Atwood's McAdam trilogy, the Quakers, who are the like genetically, I can't remember, do they photosynthesize? Or maybe they just they can eat grass, they can eat just plant matter. Anyways, it's like this like mad scientist who has like a plan to like wipe out humanity and replace us with these humans that are like peaceful and pacifist and able to sort of like survive in this more sort of state of nature. But you sort of realize that like, nothing against those people, but like they will not create a society that we would recognize as having like the kinds of things we want out of human society. And neither will the lake people or the photosynthesizers here, right? Like they're going to do something different. Like maybe they'd be able to just survive longer than baseline humans, but that's not really what we're looking for. I don't know. I haven't encapsulated that thought very well, but something about the way that we realize at some level that what's, at least outside of the book, I should say, that what is going to destroy humanity, if something destroys humanity, is us, right? And that something needs to change. And this book, in a lot of ways, feels like, it's sort of like a prolonged what's the thing from Cat's Cradle, Bocanonist, where it's like it's a prolonged way of showing that we're asking the wrong question, right? That it's like thousands of years of trying to change our genetics, and maybe that's not what needed to happen. Maybe that was not actually the solution.
Yeah, and then I find the last chapter is really interesting because it's the Great Mother and two children, and the Great Mother's very much saying, you're the last humans and you're both the same gender, so humans are going to die, oh well. And the kids also know, and it's fine. But then one of them gets a book on cloning and decides to try and create another human because he becomes obsessed with this cyclical, but can't do it with human genes and does it with animal genes, right? And then that links back to the first, which I think then links down, so it feels cyclical, but either way, the first, and there's something in that of like, actually what prevails isn't human-derived genes, it's the animal, which was my read of this like Earth Mother kind of vibe to it. So I think that's also that of, changing us to make a society, but then there are also these animal-derived ones, their town is built for them and their factory. So it is also, these characters have put that on them. It's not like they've created their own society that's different. So it kind of doesn't feel happy either. It feels sort of questionable, I would say.
That first chapter is really fascinating. And again, it's part of that like setting you off intellectually on the wrong path for the rest of the book, because all the characters you meet in the first story are right there they're derived from animals. So they have this very different kind of way than everyone else you meet in the book.
Yeah. On a reread, I thought the first chapter was technically the last chapter, and there was no link from the first chapter and the second chapter. But there's a tiny little mention of, in the first chapter in Keepsakes, there's a carousel and someone who mans the carousel. And then there's the second chapter, that's a watcher. And the watcher who comes is actually on the carousel. And I was like,
yes,
there is a link. So that's why that is truly cyclical. So in my head, it's like, how many times has this happened? Kind of, that's what I've been thinking of. Like, this just keeps going round in loops, or something. I'm not sure. It's very interesting there.
That is fascinating. I like that a lot. And that plays into the way that like this book is not trying to do a coherent science fictional world building, like where it's not trying to just lay out, here is exactly how my world works. It's doing something stranger than that.
Yeah, I love them. I like something that's just really odd and feels like an outlier. If you can't categorize it, that's my favorite type of science fiction, I think.
Yeah, no, this is really, really good. Let's take a quick break. I'm just gonna grab a drink of water. I will be right back. All right, we are back. We are still talking about Kawakami's Under the Eye of the Big Bird with Eleanor McAdam. And one of the things we were talking about in the break real quick, at the end of the episodes, I like to sort of zoom out, think about what this book is doing, sort of large picture, what it says to or about other things in the field. And unsurprisingly, there is a lot of stuff going on right now about AI. So we want to talk a little bit more about how AI works in this book, maybe what this book is doing differently to or with some of the themes that are going around a lot right now in SpecFic. And you were talking about sort of how the voices and memories of the mothers work here.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Unexplained, of course. She doesn't explain how it works, but the AIs are a kind of hive mind, and they are not individuals. They seem to work on a collective. They all know what each other knows. They share memories, and at the end, they have when they decide to all kind of end at the same time, they can do that because they're all connected. I just think that's quite interesting. Hive mind with AI is sometimes presented a little bit different, I think, in science fiction, where there is one unified personality, call it, and then lots of extremities. Well, they feel more of a collective, and I just thought that was quite unique in science fiction at the moment.
Yeah, I really dug that, and it's something that in science fictional representations of artificial intelligence, something that often bugs me is authors, or if it's film or whatever, not really thinking through how weird it is now and how weird it could be, and maybe as a corollary of that, and this is, I don't know, this is a pretentious sounding gripe, but I feel like a lot of people who are writing about non-human minds haven't thought deeply enough about how human minds work, because human minds are pretty weird. You know what I mean? And like, a lot of people have, including people who write about AI, whether that's in science fiction or elsewhere, they have a vision of how the human mind works that is, I don't say this like pejoratively, but like naive, that they think that like there's a unified human soul that's like a little homunculus that has everything about you is in there. And we know that's not how it works, right? Like the human mind is this very complicated emergent system, that has all of these different parts that we're not aware of, right? We think we know ourselves, but a little bit of introspection shows you that you really don't know that much about how you work. And you have all of these things happening that are unconscious and complicated and you're not aware of all the time. Yeah, you're right. Usually when we see AI, it is a version of that homunculus, just like a little artificial soul that's all unified and has one goal and one purpose. The ambiguity of how memory and purpose and voice work with the mothers, I really, really dug, just because it's weird. Even when you get the mothers or a mother talking to you directly, it sort of deepens the mystery a little bit of how they work, what they're thinking. I really like, it doesn't go like super deep in it, but I like how much the physicality of them is part of it. They talk about that split, right? That there was like an argument about, do we keep them sort of like just in like desktops, in machines, or do we find a way to embody them in a more human form? And that has made them this sort of stranger, harder to understand thing. But yeah, I really dug. I was thinking of, did you read, I don't know if you've read Erica Swiler's We Lived on the Horizon? It's a fairly new book. I recommend it. It's, but it's also this sort of like post-apocalyptic where people live, the few surviving people live in these sort of like walled communities. AI is very, very advanced, but not embodied. And it's about this, one of the threads in it is this person who has decided that they're going to embody an AI to kind of like carry on their work. But a lot of it is about this artificial intelligence attempting to sort of wrap its head around having a body and how weird that is. Because I think we often skip over the weirdness of bodies in talking about AIs. And to me, it like goes back to that sort of like dualist idea of how we work. It's part of why we're so weird is because we have bodies. Like,
Yeah. I think, obviously, I'm a writer myself. I am writing about this. And it's funny because the dualist aspect I find of consciousness where, yeah, you've got a little soul, little brain organizing it and the body's separate. I find it fits quite easily with AI if you're thinking of computers and software. And then, yeah, when you actually look into neuroscience and what we actually think of and all the philosophers that talk about, because there's so many, it's really interesting for me as a writer to go, oh, humans are almost way more complicated than AI. Actually, AI is quite simple if you think about it, if you're not trying to map it onto humans. So I sort of have like quite a dualist point of view, but not for humans, for AI, because I think they're quite simple. And I think a lot of people do go down that route, and the kind of being able to be bodiless on a computer or inhabit a body is like an android body, a robot body. Often people find it quite easy to talk about, right? And yeah, I agree. This one, because the AI goes into a human body, it's not robotic at all. It's not a cyborg. It is just a human body. And they start playing with the chemicals to affect the brain. And I've seen that a lot in kind of AI. If they want it to become a human-like thinking general intelligence, they have looked at chemicals and because our brains are so so complicated. You can't map it unless you are using chemicals and biology. There's something about the biological body in this that's really interesting, but they are still one mind. And I don't really think they explain that how, because is there an internet? Is there a connection? Like how are they so collective? And I just find that. And then there's the Great Mother, who is an individual, but still has the same memories. So are they an individual? How are they an individual? They just say that she's got a bit of personality to her and she's not as boring.
The undercurrent of this novel, that there are things like psionics, right? And like there are telepaths and empaths here, and they can read the mothers. They can read the AI, right? That like that there is something here that is not working according to the science we normally know. And again, I dig that, because this could have a chapter explaining like who is maintaining the Wi-Fi routers, right? That like allow the mothers to work. But that's not the kind of book this is, which I dig.
But then there is the big exposition at the end explaining AI, which I thought was a bit, for a book. Oh, to be fair, you said it was published originally in 2016. I wonder if it makes a bit more sense if I think of it as 2016 and not 2025 when it was translated. Yeah. But that felt quite over-explained. So I did wonder why there was so much explaining for things that I kind of already knew. And then very little to, AI got itself in a human body and we were symbiosis.
It is fascinating to me how much that chapter changes how I feel about the book generically, right? Like without that chapter in there, it's a very different kind of book in terms of like how genre science fiction, speculative fiction it feels. Like obviously there's, it's talking about evolution, it's talking about far future, it's talking about humans with all these weird abilities and things. But that's the chapter that sort of tries to really ground it in this is the future, this is how it works. And you're right, it would read very differently today. Today it would read like a little like waving a flag, like pay attention to me, I'm talking about something buzzy.
Yeah. I personally I think I'd enjoy it if it didn't over explain it, but I have then seen reviewers say that is the only moment they understood it. So clearly it is doing a purpose of, there are some people who maybe were too confused. So the writer in me is saying, oh, it must have been necessary, but I'm not sure.
I'm always fascinated reading translated speculative fiction and wondering what the readership expectations are of the people reading it. And because, I mean, obviously, Japan has a very strong speculative fiction tradition, but I don't know if this is like targeted towards that community. I don't know anything about like its publishing. If a book like this came out in English at first, to me, this would feel like this is targeted more toward the literary audience, less towards like, a pulp tradition, a genre SF tradition. But then you have that one chapter that almost tries to like retie it. Yeah.
Yeah, I find a lot of the reproductive technology fictions or about genetics, a lot of them are more literary or possibly just published more literary. I think because it has more relevance to the literary audience of not just women, but a lot of women will read about reproductive technologies because it feels so relevant, while they maybe wouldn't pick up a epic science fiction about space travel right now. And I find AI is also possibly bridging that gap, because AI is in everyone's minds. It has become slightly more literary. Like Clara and the Sun, of course, Ishiguro kind of broke out and was like, here is my literary science fiction that I know a lot of science fiction readers maybe didn't love, but then a lot of the general public really enjoyed it because it's the soft sci-fi. So yeah, I think it fit quite well into that bridge, but I'm not sure how much science fiction readership this book has had, really.
Yeah, like I said, I know I mentioned at the beginning it had a really nice review in Locus, but this is definitely like one of the things that makes me sad about science fiction reading community is it often is like very walled off. Mostly, I think, just around publishers, where if it's not outside, maybe 5-6 publishers, it's just most people who don't have it on their radar, which is sad. It's interesting you bring up the Claire and the Sun, because I was thinking about that totally makes sense, but I was thinking about Never Let Me Go through this a bit. Specifically, that the mix of being a very tight character focus that it spends surprisingly small amount of time thinking about and worrying about the big science fiction element. And that feels like, I mean, in miniature, that's a lot of what these stories are. We're like, yeah, I do live in this isolated community where they're trying to like genetically evolve us into superior beings, but I'm mostly going to talk about my relationship with my siblings or with my lover or whatever, you know.
I think Ishiguro, he's clever in what he picks topic-wise, but again, of course, cloning, genetics, but medical, right, is Never Let Me Go is their donors. So he doesn't really have to over-explain it too much. While I find Clara and the Son, the android aspect, again, not massively over-explained, but you kind of understand it. But there's a lot of in the world in that book that's never mentioned. Again, an apocalypse or something. There's something going on in the wider world that is hinted at and never explained, which is why it reminded me of this. Of again, there was I think the father in Clara and the Son is linked to some kind of activism and feels a bit more of that urgency, but again, quite soft, I would say, in they're not massively fearful of whatever's happening, which is why I bring the link in here.
One of the strangest things for me, sort of stepping back from this book and thinking about it, and I don't say this as a criticism of it, because I think this book works really well at what it's doing, but, you know, it's about the decline of human civilization and the human species in this sort of like vague, the population, you know, like fertility rates were declining, and there were these sort of unspecified impacts and catastrophes.
Yes.
But like, we know what's going to end human civilization, right? And it's capitalism-powered climate change, right? Like, that's, I mean, unless like an asteroid is out there that we haven't spotted yet, like that's what's going to do us in.
Yeah.
And it's very odd to divorce it so far from that, and to do this very conscious sort of like uncoupling from human history and human politics and even human like political geography, right? Like, we don't know where this is set. Like, they're just on a continent. And there are a few little links here and there that, like, you know, it is on this earth and it's connected back to it. But it does quite a bit of work to disconnect this sort of thought experiment from what we actually know is happening in the world today.
Yeah. I think somewhere it mentions Japan. I think once it said the world used to be Japan, right?
I think it's the very first chapter with like the animal people raising people. They talk about like, there used to be, they explain how it used to be. Yeah.
I think there's something about, I don't take the start of this book as the start. So I think there is no link to, like you're saying, there's no link to anything that we can remotely call modern day. So no matter where you look at it, you are removed because you have no idea how far in the future it is. And I think I forgot about the impacts. They just throw some random things. So there is no settled in that. And we have to assume that all of that is gone. Done. All of society is gone. Again, climate change makes me wonder, what, did we solve it? Or did it heal itself?
Like, they're going into a little ice age at the end, right? So I'm like, okay, so climate change has been real solved.
And then there's these luscious gardens and lots of river talk and mountains, but and they mention animals, but there's not, you don't really see anything. It is a bit far future, maybe. It's not near future. It's not showing us how we've gotten from today to this. So
we're probably getting towards wrap up here, but I wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts, either from like your own writing interests or the things you've been researching, about the sort of writing technique here or world building technique here of having these viewpoint lineages that are sort of like clonal, maybe is the best way to put it, where I've been thinking about that's a strategy that people use. I was thinking of the spider characters in Tchaikovsky's Children of Time, where they have the same characters of time. I was thinking of Anton Herr's Toward Eternity, which has these characters who, through like nanotech and replication, are sort of like the quote unquote same character over like hundreds or thousands of years. And just, it was a really odd effect to me to have these little detached stories, but then to have like, there's Jacob and Ian again. They're the mothers again, of this idea of like sort of the same individual in different bodies over a long time. I don't know. That's a vague question, but I was wondering if you had thoughts on that.
No, I think it links to, I mentioned it earlier, the kind of immortality aspect. And I think so many genetics possibly reproductive as well. So genetics often talk about immortality because a lot of people say that if we can alter our genetics, would we want to live forever, right? And again, the clonal aspect, a lot of people argue, would clones know the original personality? Would they be completely new? And then if you think of the reproductive aspect, is lineage and heritage and what you're passing on. So I think it's dealing with all of them, but in a very odd way. Like you're saying, there's these... Ian and Jacob are basically immortal, and I understood it because they were supposed to have created this system. That is something, like I said, that is usually an AI trait. So if you have AI, these mothers, they are long-living, artificial, possibly, in the fact that they extend the life. Yeah, it gets confusing, but usually they are the ones who are seeing the system through, but they have this kind of clonal recurring memories. But I found it more interesting. I think it's the character Rien, is it Rien, who it's not shared memories, but it's the lineage of clones. So she doesn't remember her past, but the name, I think they say the name is like a token that the mothers keep passing on because it was one of the mother's favourites. But then you start to see characteristics that are quite similar. So Rien always loves the Great Mother, and as a reader, I think, especially because they read like short stories and because they are very mosaic, I love it. Feels like a little treat to see the name reappear again. I think that intrigued me more than the kind of immortal characters, but I liked seeing, again, its cyclical nature of this name cropping up, and if she has a similar trait, you feel like, oh, that is something that's maybe genetic, not environmental. Yeah, I found it really interesting.
Yeah, and it does give you that kind of hook to not have to set up like a new character every 1,000 years, whatever. Yeah, that's cool. This was a great read. Thanks so much for picking this. Before we get going, is there anything you want to share about anything you're working on or where people can find you online?
Yeah, so I'm currently a PhD student, so I'm based in Liverpool, University of Liverpool, currently doing lots of things there. I organise CRSF in Liverpool, like I said, Current Research in Speculative Fiction Conference, which is great, and it is growing consistently every year. This year that Casella was on was the 15th annual, so we're hoping to continue on much longer. And then, for my PhD, I'm writing a novel for my academia. So novel has a first draft that should appear, I don't want to say soon, but that is something that hopefully you'll hear my name in the future.
Soon in the great range of time, as discussed here, yes.
In the great grand scheme, yeah. And I go by EF McAdam on socials, website, that kind of thing. So yeah, hopefully you will hear of me, but not sure how soon.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This has been really great. Thanks again for joining. Thanks again for having me read this book.
Thank you so much. I wondered if it was too weird, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
No, fantastic pick. Very, very cool. A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Barsha Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabrielle Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. Thanks to our human transcribers, Kate Dollarhyde and John W.M. Thompson. They are diligently working on getting us caught up on our transcriptions. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is rad. A few different ways you can do that. Join our Patreon. A couple dollars a month really moves us towards our sustainability and contributor paying goals. You can hang out with us on Discord, and we've got a couple other goodies in the works. If you're interested in a book we mentioned, buying from the bookshop link in our show notes or at the ARB website gets us a cut, and it helps us immensely if you just help get the word out about the show. Leaving us a review, commenting, or sharing on your platform of choice, that really helps. And it's nice to know you're listening. Questions, suggestions, pedantic notes about things we got wrong? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Blue Sky for periodic skeets, I guess. Did that term stick? Next time, we are discussing Elizabeth Kostova's massive quasi-thriller, The Historian, with scholar and comrade Sean Gines. Lots more to come. Check out the website if you want to read ahead. Thanks for listening, and read critically out there.